Cool.
I think,
well, let's jump in. So we start every episode. Stacy does the theme song. It's different every week.
All right.
Yes.
So Stacy, take it away.
John does all the preparation. This is the only thing I do to prepare. Dun 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 dun. They don't call it show fun, they call it show business. If you are a showrunner, you are the whizness. I'm sorry I rhymed the word business with whizness, 'cause this is the showrunner show. Dun 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 dun.
Yay.
All right.
All right, well, welcome to the Showrunner Show, where every week we demystify some aspect of the job of showrunning for anyone who works in TV, who wants to work in TV, or just wants to know how it's all made. This week, we're talking with Nelson Greaves.
Hello.
Greaves.
And in the topic this week is tips for the writer's room newbie. And Nelson, you know, we were doing two shows at the same time, so we really needed to rely on like badasses, and we found Nelson, thank God, and he showed up, and he was able to like keep the whole show going. He managed set, he managed the writers, like he basically did everything, did all the work. And then we just like patted ourselves on the back for like finding such a good writer and partner in Nelson. So thank you, Nelson, and so happy to have you here today.
Yeah, and our work comes out shortly for the world to see. So very excited about that.
Oh yeah, June 4th, Joe Pickett season 2.
Joe Pickett season 2.
Yeah, and so, you know, I just wanted to kick off. Like, I feel like there's so many kind of unwritten rules in a writer's room that for new people coming in, I know for myself, like when I was first in a writer's room, I was like, wait, this is how this works, and that like. I felt like I had to sort of fumble around blind, you know, to a lot of it. And I've heard like secondhand a lot of the advice, Nelson, that you've given different writers over the course of the season. I'm like, God, that's such good advice. I gotta have, sorry, just to back up, like in our first meeting, we were like, our first like Zoom interview or whatever meeting with you, you broke down how an old boss of yours hired writers, and Drew and I were like, that's the greatest advice. It was,
I haven't heard this. What is it?
Yeah. Do you remember this, Nelson?
Yeah, well, I'm sure. I mean, I'm guessing you're talking about Chris Fedak, who I saw also on the picket lines out there the other day, and he's doing great. But
That's great.
This was told to me by his assistant, so, you know, Chris might have a different take on it, but basically that he had this assistant read through some scripts and really pull stuff that really appealed to him. And, you know, he poked around and read some stuff, but basically he liked meeting people before he truly did a deep dive into reading their work, because so much of the writer's room was about, you know, the chemistry of people being able to work together. And you know, the fact is you're stuck with these people for a long time, every day for many, many months. And so, you know, it's important to make sure you like these people and to make sure that, you know, there's going to be a really healthy working environment, because at the end of the day in TV, you know, you can be the most incredible writer in the world and you can be disastrous for a show, because if you can't sit in the room and be a team player and sort of work to build this thing that is, you know, very difficult, more, you know, too difficult really for anyone to do by themselves. Like it's great that you're, and you know, the world's best writer, but you could tank the entire season. So, and that season was an incredible room, and it was just we were so functional, and we really came up with some great stuff, and it was a really good lesson for me in terms of, you know, got to be a great writer. You know, you can meet the nicest guy in the world and you got to go to their script, and, you know, it really has to be there. But, you know, I think valuing equally, not putting on rose-colored glasses or, you know, talent-colored glasses and being like, wow, this writing was so incredible. And yeah, you know, a little bit of difficult personality, but the writing is so good, and it can be easy to look past that stuff.
Sure, he
When
was
you know,
late and sulky and high,
yeah,
rude to the waiter. But you know what?
yeah.
Yeah.
Boy,
Well,
can he
here,
land a character.
if you had to choose, like binary, you have to choose like great writer but shitty in the room, or great in the room and shitty writer. Who do you go with?
I mean, I'm gonna cheat and say I choose one person who's great in the room and a shitty writer, and choose one person that's bad in the room and a great writer. I think ultimately not having both is a recipe for success or for failure. And I can rewrite someone. Um, hopefully I can rewrite them well.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can rewrite them terribly, and uh, but that is a problem you can fix. One would hope you're never hiring a shitty writer, but different writers struggle with different things, and I include myself in that. And there are some things that come very easy to me, and there's some things that are harder for me to do. So I think that the most essential thing in a room is on a show is that people can be good in the room, which is, I know, the
Yeah.
answer that you were getting at.
Yeah.
But
Tricked you.
because that's a problem that can't really be fixed except kicking people out of the room, or you know
Yeah.
silencing them, which is also not good for room morale, or the chemistry of a room.
I feel like newbie writers also, well, all writers, but definitely newbie writers, they just spend a lot more time in the room too. Maybe you're going to get one episode. If there are 10 episodes, maybe you're going to get one. You know what I mean? But you're in the room. If you are upbeat and you can pay attention, you can keep people focused, and you can generate ideas, and you can riff. If you're good in the room, then you're going to find your ideas sprinkled through everybody's episodes. And really, you're only going to be given one or maybe two anyway. Do you know what I mean? So better to be good in the room.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true as well. And I think it's very hard being a newbie writer. I um, think that there's a lot of pressure. I remember being in my first room, and I think I was a lot more oblivious, and I was um, probably I probably should have been a little bit more deferential and spoken less and been less loud. But I was coming from having made this indie movie where I was like producing it, and I was sort of like, well, now I'm here and I'm loud, and it was a very non-traditional room anyway. But in a traditional room, there's a lot of pressure. You're with these big people. I remember I met a guy in my first room who wrote on Alf, and to
That's
me that
Wow.
just
awesome.
exploded my mind that I'm sitting here with a person who wrote Alf, and like, that also speaks to being fresh in the business, where everyone is so, it's like, oh my god, these people have done these, and being now when it's just like, oh yeah, my friend created that HBO hit, which is such a thing. But
What you were getting at though, how much to talk, like I found that too, seeing sometimes newbie writers show up and they don't speak at all, and sometimes they're like the loudest voice in the room, and there's a danger to that, in that the least experienced person is essentially taking over control of the ship, you know what I mean, and is steering it like kind of all over the place. What would you say, like what would be a perfect amount of talking for a newbie writer?
yeah, I mean, I would say, definitely err on the side of saying less, but at the same time, you were picked to be in this room for a reason. The showrunner saw value in you, and they weren't bringing you on this show to do you a favor or to fill a seat. They were bringing because you have a perspective that they want to hear. So, I think it's about really making sure you're speaking when you have something to say. I think in writers' rooms, it's really easy to just sort of jump in and start talking about something and riffing when you don't actually have something meaningful to say. And a writer's room is a difficult place sometimes because, on one hand, all we're doing is riffing and just sitting around, and sort of shooting the shit, and out of that comes a story. But at the same time, it's easy to not actually have a point, and just sort of speak to speak. I think the other thing is, and this is true of not just being a newbie writer, of being all kinds of writers, but I think it's a lesson you learn, is not saying no as a newbie writer, never jumping in and shooting an idea down.
That's a good, yeah.
Yeah. And, nobody, a bad idea will kill itself, or if it needs to be killed, it'll be killed by, somebody who's being paid to kill bad ideas, which is maybe my favorite description of a showrunner ever.
That's amazing. I love that.
But nobody needs you to do that. And it's like, people want what you have to add, not for you to be a gatekeeper.
That's great advice. I would say too, relitigating, like almost like, as a newbie, like almost like you're on the freeway. You don't want to be the fastest car on the freeway, like ducking in and out of traffic. You don't want to be the slowest holding stuff up. Like you want to be kind of going with the flow of traffic. And then I would say after the fact too, like to not, like the room has decided on a thing and sort of moved on to another thing, like coming back after a break or something, saying like, I want to go back to that thing because I think we made the wrong decision. Like I've seen that before too, where it's like, no, let's just keep in the flow. Let's keep moving forward. And I think that's, to your point, Nelson, that relitigation sort of falls under the gatekeeper.
I found something super helpful for this because I have a very difficult time not talking. And I also, what drives me absolutely bananas is when it's like, okay, let's hear some ideas. How do they find the dead body? Let's come up with great ways that they find the dead body. And a couple people get to pitch, right? And I'm there and I can't wait to say my thing about how they find the dead body. But then the showrunner hears something they like from pitch number 3 and like, good, we're going to go with that. And the room rolls with that. And I'm just sitting there dying like, I wanted to say my way. So I used to not be able to keep my mouth shut. I just couldn't. And then during the breaks, to be like, Stace, can I talk to you? and that's when I would hear that. So anyway, what I ended up doing was I have this little notebook. I keep it beside me. I keep the pen. And it helps me stay focused too, where I can write down my cool idea, right? And if the room flows past me and I didn't get to say it, well, I've got it there, right? It's for all time. And if the next day it turns out that we go back to it of like, you know what, we thought that was the pitch, but what did you say, killing bad ideas? If that one turned out to be a bad idea and it dies, I've got mine there to talk about. Or if I'm high up enough that I can get the showrunner's ear, then I can privately say, hey, here's another way we could go. Or honestly, especially with thriller type shows or mystery type shows, you're going to need 4,000 clues. Just because you didn't get to have your clue or your solution for this moment, you can save that cool little set piece you came up with for something else. You could stick it in. I drag set pieces just from season to season. Like, now can we do the thing with the blow up doll in the trailer? Now, one of these days.
We've had that one, and
Bear Attack.
We had that Falcon and Ducks thing at the start of episode 6 or so in Joe Pickett season 2. Like that is something like that set piece, that teaser with Nate and the Falcons and Ducks rolled from episode to episode all season 1. We never found a place. Drew kept admonishing me, get mad at me for like, we can't build the whole episode around, the teaser. Like we have to do the teaser last, not first, which is a real weakness of mine. I love teasers, and that's really all I want to do in episodes. And I got to say, conversely, in Waco season 1, like we blew past this, like we were going to do a wedding sequence, and then we blew past that and we decided not to do it. Like, is that too light or, feeling? And we all went home, and the next morning I came in, and the assistant and a co-producer had shown up early to discuss how they could convince us to bring back the wedding sequence. And just that kind of dedication. It wasn't anything they said. It was that they cared so much that they showed up early and they were discussing like a plan to reapproach it. And we ended up putting it back in. And I would argue like the sequence and the way John Leguizamo, eventually starts dancing with the congregation after the wedding. Like, I feel like that sequence was a big part of the reason that he got nominated for an Emmy, in that season, was that wedding sequence. And I don't know, I'm so proud of that, in part because we had killed it and it was, brought back. And I guess
also assumed that when they pitched it to you, they were succinct and articulate. It wasn't just somebody bloviating of like, no, it's not somebody eating up the whole afternoon talking about how they like the thing. It's like, it was probably a clear message.
Yeah. Well, and it was outside of the room too. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I feel like sometimes in the room, show running, like half the time you're just terrified you're making the wrong decision, and to have people arguing or like relitigate, like sometimes it can be really scary. I'd say, directing as well, like as a director on set, like every once in a while, just everyone turns against you and eat you for lunch. And that was like my day 2 of studio, like on quarantine, day 2, like first studio movie, the actors just ate me for lunch. And it was like, at the end of the day, it was like, wow, I made it, and I don't think I want to do this job ever again.
What have I done?
What have I done?
And I hate it.
I spent 12 years climbing this ladder, and I hate this. This was torture. Climbing, ladder to a rung of hell. And Drew talked me down from the ledge that night, and then Drew, had some words with the producers, and I like prepared in a whole new way. I drew like, okay, you're blocking, you go from here to like, something I would never do now, but at that point I needed to learn to prepare in a different way.
I just think to sort of follow up on things you both said, I think, you can always, sometimes showrunners are strong personalities, and they can be frightening at times, but, I don't know any showrunner who gets mad or annoyed at an email after the room of like, hey, this is an idea that I'd had in the room that I just wanted to share. I think if it's a thing that you do after every single room and you're, every single day of the week, this guy's getting an email or this, this woman's sorting through, the hundreds of emails you're sending, then yeah, absolutely. You can be annoying, but we're all in the business of putting great ideas together. And, I've been in a few rooms where a version of, John, what you said with Waco, where the showrunner comes in and says, hey, this person sent me this thing last night. I think they're really interesting ideas. Let's like start today by taking a look at these,
That's
or
great.
You get an email back that says, hey, this is a cool idea. Let's hang on to it. Some polite version of no. But, didn't interrupt anything. It didn't, all it caused was a showrunner having to read an email for a second. And, I think generally that kind of thing is really appreciated. I think as a young writer, showing initiative, but showing the right amount of initiative, not too much. You never want to become a burden. But there's a lot of stuff like that. I also think, I don't think it's a terrible problem to come back from lunch and, especially if there was something really tricky you were talking about before lunch, to be like, I feel like I do this a lot, where I'd be like, okay, guys, I have a crazy idea. Like, remember that thing we were talking about? Like, what if it's the complete opposite? And like, hopefully you can read the room. And if people are like, no, that doesn't work, be like, okay, cool.
Is that something you'd only do as a high level writer, or would you have done that as a newbie?
No, I think that's something I would have done as a newbie. I mean, it's like hard to tell because I'm sort of like loud and unaware, I think.
But you've done well, so maybe that's a gift,
Yeah.
But no, I don't think that's inappropriate at all. And every room is very, very unique. And they're all sort of little tiny Stanford prison experiments, I think, where you sort of give people titles and put them in an enclosed space, and suddenly someone is the boss who, doesn't necessarily have management skills, but is a good writer. But, if the room feels like I think that's a totally acceptable thing to do. And just to follow up, Stacy, on your thing of like writing things down, I think that one of the hardest things about being in the room is letting good ideas that you have die because you didn't get a chance to say them. And it's like, they can be, sometimes the ideas just die. and it can be so hard. It's like you're just like, oh, I have the answer, but I'm not able to get in. And like, then you just accept that it's never going to happen. And, you know, you move on, and, you know, maybe your idea was perfect, but part, you know, there's casualties in war. And,
I love
but that is very hard.
Another thing I did where you could even, I liked the room ending, and then I would write down the experience. I had like a spreadsheet. This is so dumb, but I would say like, this is what we did and talked about before, you know, before the coffee break. This is what we did after the coffee break. This is what we did after lunch, you know, and I kept kind of a running thing of it because I thought, oh, if I ever run a room, I'm going to be so scared. I want to be able to look back and go like, how long did we blue sky? How long did we talk about one? Like how long did each thing take, you know? Because if I ever do get to run a room, I don't want to be like a deer in the headlights, like, oh, God, you know? And I found that really helpful. I could see doing a similar thing. So that was just to be like, literally, what did we talk about? You know, I'm going to forget. But you could also, I imagine, do a similar thing for, say you had ideas that you thought were really great, you didn't get to do. You could just keep a running list of them. You know what I mean? And if you're on the show long enough, like I said, you'll probably have a chance to pitch those again for a different episode, a different season, or, you know, a whole different series.
Yeah. I think I love that. And I gotta say too, to go back to the like kind of relitigation, like I love the way you're saying it, Nelson, with like, I have a crazy idea. What if we turn it on its head? I would couch it as, if it's like, you know, sort of a general flow thing, like that's one thing. If it's been a hot button, like there's every once in a while a thing that everyone just has a different opinion on. It becomes, I don't know, like kind of a blood sport for like this one detail, like, you know, this like, and I feel like in every room there's that, you know, that thing, and, you know, and I can remember what they are in most rooms, you know, but going back, sometimes it's like you just have to stick a card on the board and keep moving on those. And then going back, you know, I would say going back to a hot button topic right after lunch, like going back to, I don't know, something that emotions were flaring, could be, I don't know. I would avoid that.
I would say, as a new writer, whenever emotions are flaring, completely avoid any of those things at all. That is like a gunfight that's happening above your pay grade. Don't get embroiled in that, because, you know, I mean, things can get ugly in rooms, and, you know, things can get mean. And just, it's not, you just shouldn't be in the middle of it. Let people who are getting paid a lot more to endure this, be the ones hashing it out. I think more of what I was thinking of, you know, not something that's gonna to blow anything up, but, you know, I also think it's, anytime you're doing something like that, coming in very, very gently, you know?
Yeah.
And couching something as, this is a crazy idea, or it's like, it's just an idea, I don't want to blow anything up, but it's just like, I had it at lunch, so I'm just going to say it, and then we can move on.
That's great.
Yeah.
Those can be super helpful too. Like, because every once in a while, people are just locking horns because they're tired. They don't have a better idea. You know what I mean? Like, there's, Drew and I like to, you know, between the two of us, because we're like a, you know, collaborative duo, that there's always that third way. There's always like, I may have an idea of, I think this thing should be this way, and Drew thinks it should be this way. There's always a third way that can, you know, make sense of both of those things. Not splitting the difference, you know, necessarily, but like
a third way.
A third way. Like, and we always try to prioritize the third way over our way, if that makes sense.
I think it's helpful to be able to articulate why you're coming up with the idea. You know, you don't always have to do this. Sometimes you can just pitch the idea and people are like, no, or you pitch it and they're like, great. But sometimes, especially if people are moving in circles, or you're looking for that third way that you're talking about, John, it's helpful to be able to say, like, I like all the ideas we're coming up with, but I was really hoping for a moment between these two characters that was deeper. We've been keeping things kind of shallow and light. I was hoping for like a really rich moment. Or conversely, you could go like, these are fun. I like these moments that we came up with, but I was really kind of hoping that when we had this solution, or at the end of, you know, this act, that we'd have a really exciting moment. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if you could say what you're looking for, whether it's more depth or more surprise or more excitement or whatever it is that you're hungering for, and that's what you're trying to pitch on. I think it's helpful to be able to articulate that sometimes, not all the time, but especially if everyone's going back and forth, and ideas taking longer for people to solve than usual.
Yeah.
Stacy, I will also say, is the best at this of anyone who I have ever worked with, of
Yeah.
really being able to come in and exactly articulate where her thought is coming from.
That's
And
so
it's
nice.
very,
Thanks.
oh no,
Yeah.
it's very, very true. So, don't be don't be discouraged if you have trouble deftly having these explanations at your fingertips, because Stacy makes it seem very easy, but it can be difficult.
That's a really good point. And you're
I'm
absolutely
looking
right.
for an idea that's more my idea. I'm looking for something that's not your idea.
Well, and part of this, I think a lot of this is looping back, like a writer's room is like a team sport. You know what I mean? Like we've all been on team sports where if we've played team sports where there's like the one person who wants to do all the stuff themselves and, or like teams that really work together. And, it's at the end of the day, like you hear a writer was on the show Succession and you're like, wow, that writer, like that glory is spread across everyone in that room versus in the room, that person might have felt competitive with the people around them. But that internal competition, I feel like, sometimes people, I think, may lose sight because these are the people you're surrounded by every day. Sometimes lose sight that you're a team and you'll rise or fall together at the end of the day.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's like, especially when you're not writing anything, it can be hard because it feels like your only chance to win anything is in this room pitching ideas. And, I think I certainly find myself at times like arguing something that I don't even actually believe in, or like it's just like I somehow found myself on the other side of this debate. And, hopefully I'm able to, stop myself and be like, I don't actually believe in it. I completely
What am I
back
doing?
down. But you can trap yourself in there because it's like, this is what we're doing. We're here to discuss ideas, and suddenly I'm engaged in a debate.
Yeah.
Sometimes people get very attached to their favorite characters too. I feel like that's where a lot of the fights come from, and the competition isn't even so much writer to writer or like, I want my ideas, but more, I don't know. It seems to me that writers usually end up with their one or two or three very favorite characters that they like to write for and pitch for. And so it's almost like, I'm not being very articulate, but you know what I mean? Like somebody's competing to have their favorite character whose voice they love to write in have bigger moments.
Yeah, I still remember like season 1 of Pickett, like, Stacy was like Jeannie Keeley and the Weasel, like, like those are like her favorite things to write.
And the sisters.
And the sister, oh yeah, the sisters. And yeah, it reminds me, I had a writer friend who had this dream once where he went to a movie, like he was in a movie theater and on screen, there was a guy who looked just like him and horrible things were happening to him and everyone around him was like laughing hilariously. And he was so upset, like, that they were all laughing at horrible things happening to a guy who was just like him. And I think so. It's funny how much like in the writer's room, things get personal and like we, get vulnerable. We talk about, this thing happened to me, when I was a kid and, and we write that into stuff and we form like real, like, I don't know, emotional attachments, I think, to different characters. And if, everyone wants to kill off a character that you feel emotionally attached to or something horrible happened to that character, I think that can, people can have surprising reactions to things, because it is so kind of therapeutic in a way.
I think that can even really like be on a micro scale where you just have some pitch that you just, maybe it is coming from a very personal place. And so you feel like there is an absolute truth in it that you just like hold on to. And I would say maybe the worst thing of all things in a room, short of like people who like, publicly degrade other people's ideas and call things stupid and stuff like that. Cause that's, but in the realm of not being a horrific person, like being a dog, there's all this room jargon that, when you get in a writer's room, suddenly, there's like hang a lantern on it and, putting a button. And one of them is being a dog with a bone. And it's when you won't let a pitch go. And there's nothing more disruptive in a room and worse for a show than somebody holding on and refusing to let the conversation move forward because they want their pitch to be the thing. And Somebody told me at one point, I forget who, or maybe I made it up myself. Never pitch more than twice. It's like, if you really love something,
never pitch one idea more than twice.
One idea more than twice. And it's like, if you really, really love things and then somebody says no, and you say like, I don't know, I really think this is the right thing. If people say no again, that idea is dead. Never think about it again. Because there are people who they'll continue to bring stuff up, and it's really annoying and disruptive, and it doesn't look good. Come up with a new idea. Like, yeah.
I love that. I love that advice, because it is, at the end of the day, this is it's a professional environment. It's a job. Like, it's we're building a boat, and you may, want to, I don't know, put an emblem on the boat that nobody else likes, or it doesn't fit. And to roll with that, I think, is so important. Like, I love that. I love that piece of advice.
I want to do stuff with the boat analogy too, because see, if I were building a boat, the only thing I would care about is like the prow. I'd be all, just like I always like the secondary characters and the quirky moments. I'd be like, fuck the boat. Nice. There you go.
I love that.
Smarty pants. I would just want to talk about that mermaid, like, what do they call it? A masthead? Whatever.
Oh, yeah. You'd be all masthead.
I'd be
and
all
you'd want to go
masthead
like granny style. You'd want to make it look like a granny house,
It'd be amazing.
like masthead.
My masthead would be like a fairy garden. It'd be so cool. But if I'm a dog with a bone and I'm obsessing about this masthead, and meanwhile the whole room has moved on, guess what? While I'm completely focused on that one thing, and all I can do is think about, obsess about, pitch about, and think about that one thing, all the other decisions are getting made without my focus, without my attention. I could have been there helping out with the end of Act 5, or helping out with how to land a character, or helping out with, how to make the boat float, any of that. And I've missed all of it because I've been thinking about this other thing. Which, by the way, obsessing about that one thing is still better, well, maybe it's not, than people who just tune out, where that happens sometimes, where somebody does their pitch, they really love something, it dies, it hurts their feelings, and they spend the rest of the room or the rest of the season not participating. Kind of like, if it's in a Zoom room, which is mostly what I've done, you can see their little fingers are flying and their eyes are shifting, and you're like, you're writing something else, aren't you? You're just like, nobody can even tell if I'm talking, so that can happen too, where people don't get their pitch, they won't let it go, and so they're out. They're just going to cross their arms and be like, you do your show then.
Yeah, that's so true. Some people do, like, or after, one of the things that I feel like isn't told to new writers enough is you will be rewritten. You know what I mean? Like, straight across the board, no matter what, you will be rewritten. That is not because you didn't do a great job or that you're not brilliant. Like, it's just how, the show has to have kind of one overall tone and stuff. So, some of that, and I've seen, and I, and heard stories also of like writers who get rewritten and are just like, well, then why do I even show up? You know what I mean? And have sort of a checked out quality after that. And I'd say
that's hard. I mean, it is, writing is personal, and, it's like, I've done many seasons of television, and still every time, even on like Pickett, John would rewrite something of mine, and, it's like absolutely making it better, absolutely like bringing it more in line with the show. But it's like, it's hard to not feel like it's a judgment on you, even if, the other part of your brain can understand, actually, no, this is correct. That's just the nature of writing. But especially when you're young and don't have that confidence, and you don't honestly know if you can do this job truly. I mean, that's how I felt. I was just like, oh, maybe I can't do this job. Knowing, that this is, everyone's experiencing this, no matter how successful you are.
I think it's good for newbie writers to know as well. There's a wide variety from room to room, showrunner to showrunner, even season to season, of how you're going to be asked to be part of the rewriting process or not. Like, say, you turn in your draft, and maybe the showrunner or the strong number 2 will look at it and say, hey, I've got some notes for you. I'm going to kick it back to you. I'm going to ask you to take those notes and send it to me. Or they might not do that. They might just go, thank you very much for the draft. And they might do the rewriting even before they send it up the chain. Then once it goes up the chain to like the producers, and then the studio, and then the network, then you may or may not, as the writer, as the newbie writer, be invited to be on the phone calls or the Zooms where they give notes on those drafts. And then, once you get the notes, say, from the network, who's going to take those notes? Sometimes the showrunner, the strong number two, might say like, hey, original writer, now's your chance to take them. Let's see what you have to, what you can do. Or you might never get to see it again. I think, is that true? There's that much variety and they're all acceptable, right? Nelson, I'm asking you because you have way more experience than me.
No, for sure. For sure. That varies wildly. But bringing this back to the room, though, I think the same kind of thing can happen in a room where, especially when you're a younger writer, you're pitching less frequently. And, I think, and it's like, you can see it with younger writers. It's like younger writers are like writing assistants where it's like, they're just like, they're waiting. It's like, they feel so uncomfortable talking over people and, understanding sort of the rhythm of writers' rooms and how you interrupt people, like what is the acceptable level of interruption, and there's a whole thing of like, you got to jump, you got to like know when you're allowed to start. And it's really like a skill that you learn, a muscle, and you don't have it when you're a staff writer. And so it can be like, okay, I'm waiting. Now's my chance. I pitch something, lukewarm response or even negative response. It's so easy to be like, well, dang, now I'm never going to pitch anything again. As opposed to it's like, no, it's like, that one didn't work, but like everyone wants you to get back up. Everyone wants you to keep pitching. That's why you're here.
Yeah.
When people are shy, I actually had a writer, because I'm not shy. I love interrupting. It's all I do. And I had a writer call me and say like, hey, I want to pitch more. I don't think I'm talking enough. I notice you feel very comfortable pitching. Polite way to say it. Do you have any tips? And I was like, oh, first of all, I was super flattered. Like, oh my God, you asked me for advice. Thank you so much. But then, I think part of it, because like you said, Nelson, you're sitting there going, when can I jump in? When can I jump in? 6 people are talking and they're all above my pay grade. When can I jump in? By the way, as you're thinking that and your heart's pounding, literally, you're missing everything they're talking about. I mean, you can't hear shit when, you've missed all the ideas they've thrown out because your ears are just buzzing of like, when am I going to jump in? I think it can be helpful to know what phrase you're going to jump in with. You can even be a dork and write them down on the side, like, here's an idea, or I've got one, or this sounds crazy. Something that inserts you quickly so that when you jump in, you can verbally jump, as opposed to your thing goes, well, I think maybe, and you've already lost them. You know what I mean? People are going to talk over you. You know what else is nice about that? If the more shy people have a little phrase that they can jump in with, it also balances things out, because some people do the most talking and jumping all the time because they're just fucking loud. They got big mouths and they're a little obnoxious. And I think, even though I'm probably one of those people, I think rooms always benefit if those obnoxious, talk too much voices kind of speak a little less and the shy people speak a little more. I don't know, just a thought. Sometimes you can have disingenuous ones too. Like I'll be like, I want to piggyback off of what so-and-so said. And I don't care what they said at all. I'm not piggybacking off of shit. This is a whole new topic, but I want to circle back. I want to piggyback on that, or adding to what Nelson said. Here's my whole other thing. I love the thing about like a fish jumping out of the water. What if it jumped off of the water and caught a baby and dragged the baby under the water?
Jeez. Just off the top of your head, that's what you picked.
I should not have taken that spray of mushrooms before we start. No, but it's nice to name check people. It includes them and sort of focuses them. And then you are all truly building off of, it's not your idea or their idea. The ideas are pinging back and forth until the whole room comes up with an idea. Doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's very satisfying.
I love that.
Now, also to piggyback off that, see what I did. There's really a whole language to this, and it is really like this. What Stacy's saying, that there are all of these phrases. Okay, what if we turned it on its head? Or I think calling out people and be like jumping off of that thing. Learning these skills and like observing how these other writers are speaking and the way that they get pitches out. And it is really, there are all of these strategies and all of these different things that you use, and just listen and observe. And it's not just about what you're saying, it's about the methods of delivery. Because it's not just having a normal conversation. It's not just sitting around. It is, you are functionally doing something. You are, it's a little bit like a courtroom where there are, these ways that you do stuff. And hopefully it's more upbeat than a courtroom. Sometimes it's less upbeat than a courtroom, but it's sort of a formalized conversation, even if it seems to an untrained observer to be just people chatting.
I love that. And, to that point too, like that kind of idea of like professionalism, or, Drew and I like to say, like, always be selling, like always be marketing ourselves in everything we do to like look like we're, I don't know, professional, prepared, you know what I mean? Like we try to never seem like we're just goofing around, you know what I mean? Like, and I think so often, some writers have a natural gift for this, where they show up, they're eager, they're prepared, they read all this stuff. And those writers tend to do really well in the writer's room environment and move up very quickly. And some don't do that as much. We had, in a Zoom room, we had, someone doing the writer's room from, hotel room in Cabo with a bunch of friends, like milling around in the back. Like it's not a good look. You know what I mean? That's not, you know what I mean? There's things like that where, you can tell who's engaged and who's doing the research. Like people notice the people who are showing up and playing full in, even if they're not pitching constantly, you can tell who's engaged. And, in Zoom rooms, like there's times when you see the light suddenly change, on the screen in someone's face. You're like, oh, you're like watching a movie or something. Like you're truly checked out. And then they pitch on something. You're like, you literally have no idea what's been,
you didn't listen to the last half
pitch.
Hour.
Yeah, that's a pitch from half an hour ago that someone else had. Like, you can tell very quickly who you want in the next room. And I think so much of that is, building a career is not like, well, they didn't take my idea, so, F this show. Like, I'm just going to phone it in and I'll get a better show on the next season. But all the people in that room are going to go to different shows. They're all going to be, everyone in that room, the writer's assistant may be, the biggest showrunner, in 5 years. You know what I mean? Like, you just don't know. And just to be always, kind of putting your best foot forward and trying to keep your eyes on the horizon, not on the individual waves. You know what I mean? And just to remember, like, this detail in this script doesn't really matter. What matters is, 5 years from now, I want all these people to like think of me and be like, I would love to work with that person. They're a killer. Like they show up, they're always prepared. They're always like, they really care. They put their heart into it. And it's like, I know, like, you can see the difference very clearly,
I feel like you're talking about focus. And I've noticed that's an important thing in the room that people don't really talk about, but because people do chat at first. People arrive in the room. It's not the first sentence out of somebody's mouth is about the show. Usually there's, 5 minutes of how was your weekend or things like that, maybe even more on a Friday. And that stuff's actually really valuable. And as people are pitching, they might naturally share something from their childhood or their life experiences. That's where the personal and the professional blend. But basically it's a matter of focus. How much can people focus on what the task of the day is? And people have varying degrees. Some people really poop out. They can't do much after lunch. They're sort of checked out. They wish it was all just joking and talking. And I find for me, something that helps with focus and helps maintain focus is I try to think of whenever I'm in the room, I really enjoy the room, as being two jobs. One job is I'm doing whatever task we have that day, whether it's coming up with the climax of the season, whatever it is. And my other job is to learn. Just to learn everything I can about all the stuff we've been talking about. How do you jump in on a pitch? What works, what ideas work or die, just anything that I can learn. Thinking of the room as a learning process keeps me engaged in a more calm way, where I'm not as excitable as like, oh, I have a pitch, it failed. Oh, I have a pitch, it failed. I can sort of take a more observant tone and, oh my God, I am rambling. Somebody save me from this thought.
No,
it's just fizzled.
No, that's so, I love that. Like Drew and I, like like, like to say, our goal is to be the best filmmakers, writers, directors, producers. Like, our goal is to be the best at this we can possibly be. And you don't get there without learning like how to fix a script that's not working, or how to fix the movie you shot poorly. You know what I mean? Like, how do you make a movie you shot that doesn't work? I remember, I shot Quarantine, and I called Stacy when I saw the, first cut, and I was like, oh my God, they're like, my career is over. Like,
well, your studio notes were like, every day they were like, more shaky cam, make it shake more, make it more exciting. And you're like, I don't know about this, guys. And then you put it all together, and it's like, Jesus Christ, why is the camera shaking so much? It's like, because you made me.
Yeah, it was horrible. And there was that, and then there's just like, it just didn't, the first cuts of it didn't work, like, truly. And I was like, oh, and I've since learned, like, over time, oh, my movies never work. I always shoot them terribly. And I always look at the first cut and they're terrible. And then I just turn the screws on it, and it eventually works. And the first 2 weeks of post, and I've told other directors, like, oh, the first 2 weeks of post, like,
you're going to be sad.
Yeah. And they're like, no. I know what I shot. It was amazing. And then they call me in the first 2 weeks of post. They're like, oh my God, thank God you forewarned me that I was going to feel that way. But I think so much of it is like to learn. Yeah. To show up and learn. And if that's the goal, is to be, and I feel like that is the best mentality. The people who show up eager, ready, pitch something, it doesn't work, it gets thrown out, and they stay engaged. They're not like, oh, like, if you're showing up for self-worth on, you know what I mean? Like, am I good at, do these people think I'm good at this, or do they think I'm bad at this? If that's your primary objective, like, it can be like, today they love me, today they don't, today, that can be a very, tumultuous thing to put yourself through. But if you're like, hey, nobody's going to show up like having all the answers. We all have to rely on each other. Everyone's here to support me, and I'm here to support them. And I'm going to learn a lot in every room, even if it's like learning how I don't want to run a show, room when I'm show running, even if it's that, like, which, it's like dating, like, you learn from dating as much what you don't want, as much as what you do over time.
Agreed. I know we're getting it, it's 10 o'clock, but we keep teasing out this glossary of terms. Can we just throw some of them out? Is there any value to that? Of like, hang the lantern. I don't even know what hang the lantern means. Should we do some of those?
Yeah, Nelson, why don't you walk us through a glossary of terms? So, like, I think this would be great.
Gosh, I'm being really put on the spot.
Registered trademark, Nelson Greaves glossary.
How about hang a lantern on it?
Yeah, so hang a lantern on it is when you're talking about something and you notice some detail that is like weird. So, it's like, it doesn't really make sense why they wouldn't have called the police, and you're like, oh, what if we hang a lantern on it and be like, oh, look, they didn't call the police. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, this is I'm going to be terrible at these.
No, that's
this
great.
Might be a part of the show we cut because
no. I think this is so helpful. Like, because these are tricks and tools. Like, hey, this thing doesn't. The logic of this thing doesn't make sense. But if we call it out very clearly, so the audience knows that we also see it, then they can let their mind rest and not go, wait, that doesn't make any sense. They didn't call the cops. Because if they're like, why didn't, if our heroes are like, why didn't those people call the cops when this thing happened? Like, that's suspicious. Like, then.
And you could do that through dialogue or action, right? The dialogue could be like, hey, Harry, why didn't they call the cops? That's pretty good, right, guys?
Oh, it's
or
amazing.
The action could just be, off of her face, she looks confused. Why didn't they call the cops? ?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say it's less that actually, and it's more inactive story. I think thinking of it less on paper and thinking of it more just like the breaking of a story. If it's like something seems weird, let's calling it out basically. Or leaning into the fact that it's weird, as opposed to trying to hide it from people, which is never going to work because audiences are smart.
Yeah.
So I said, like, being a dog with a bone, that's, you have an idea that you really, really love and the room is trying to move on. and you just don't move on.
Blue Sky?
Blue Sky, I think that crosses, multiple genre or, multiple disciplines, but that's just sort of thinking we're just blue skying. We're trying to plan, the season. This is the first week or first 2 weeks. Let's just throw up every idea that we have, and really not try to restrict ourselves to anything.
And not get too in the weeds where you're getting real specific.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or losing the forest, seeing the forest for the trees, losing the forest for the trees.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the exact wording is, basically missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Right. Of like our heads are, we're worried about something in this scene, but it's like, losing sight of the big picture, that like this doesn't matter. We're getting confused about something that's actually very simple if we just step back.
I love that. A mailbox, what is it? A mailbox idea or mailbox pitch? Is that?
I've never heard that.
It's like, it's like the wrong address, but it's like, I have a pitch, like something in this world. Andy and Lauren would use that one. I can't remember.
Oh,
it was like
I've never heard that one.
It was God, they called it a mailbox pitch or something. Like it's the wrong address, but it's the right neighborhood. Something. Like, or I think there's things that are just simple, like, hey, this is the bad version of this
bad
pitch.
Version.
Here's the bad version. But what if, a guy knocks on the door, opens the door and says, why didn't they call the cops? You know what I mean? Like, that's the bad version, but you know what I mean? Like, and that's truly bad. But
I like how our listeners are probably increasingly like, can these guys write at all?
have any of them been in a writer's room?
Landing a character, that's one of my favorites. I love when people land a character. Like when you meet a character for the first time, you meet them in such a way that it's not some generic way. It's some way that's really them. It's memorable. It gives you a glimpse into their true character. Let your trashy characters be trashy and let your noble ones be noble. Like, land the character.
I love that. That's an important one too. And it's hard to land 10 characters at once. You know what I mean? When you see in a script, like, meet Joe Schmo and Susie Schmo and this person and this, it's like you want to kind of do it one at a time and just really do something memorable every time you want to land a character.
Yeah. There's a lot.
Those are good.
I wish
those
I
are
was
good.
sitting in a room that I could make a list of them, but they're not. If you're in a room and you're listening to people, they're all wonderfully context clueable. So nobody listening should feel like they got to figure out all these things. So before they come into a room, they're going to understand everything. It's just sort of a learned jargon that people use as shortcuts in writers' rooms.
And you can ask people, not to get the room too off track, but if it's appropriate, you can ask a person like, what does that mean? Or where did that come from? And chances are they're going to tell you a hilarious story about like, I was in a room with so-and-so and he used to say this all the time. And let me tell you, I like the war stories are so fun. And usually if a person has an unusual phrase that can't be figured out from context, there's usually a fun little anecdote behind it about a colorful old coot.
Yep. Well, let's jump into the rapid fire 4 and wrap this episode up. So there's 4 questions we ask every week. The first of those is, what is the first television show you truly loved and why?
So I took this, it's like I liked things when I was young, but I took this to be like as an adult. And the answer is Smallville. And
amazing.
I think because it was just this, like, I was perfectly the right age. I was a freshman in high school and I was in love with Lana Lang. And it was just this like perfectly soapy combination of being a teenager, but then also like Superman going and doing crazy things. And I also was really obsessed with the Lex Luthor character for reasons that I don't know, but I feel like I still write Lionel Luthor, his father, in so many of the things that I do because it just planted so much on me. But definitely Smallville. I used to call my buddy on the commercial breaks, which is like such an experience that doesn't exist now, and be like, oh my gosh, like, did you just see that? And be like, okay, it's coming back. And then we would hang up on each other.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that.
What is your favorite part of the job?
My favorite part of the job, this is hard, and I thought about it. I honestly really like writing. I really like sort of the experience of like getting things that are completely intangible. It's the hardest part of the job, I think, for sure. But like having written a scene that is like great, it's just very satisfying. And then, of course, it's like you write it and it's great. And it's like basically never better than that, because then it's going to be torn apart a billion different ways and, completely cut in half on set, and the whole thing's going to be changed. But like that first part of it where it's pure and pristine, and I really enjoy that.
That's beautiful. What is the part of the job that costs you something?
I mean, I think the main thing is, it's a similar thing of other jobs, but it's like, I think there is a real sacrifice of like a work life distinguishing, where it's like, it can always, I mean, I'm also just a super, like a workaholic. And so every time I'm not working, I just feel guilty about what I'm doing. But, the fact that you sort of are always at the edge of not having a job, you always kind of have to be looking for other things, and that means missing out on things, that missing out on being with your family because you have to go to set for 3 months in Alberta, for instance. And there are just real sacrifices that you have to have, staying up Friday night because you have to get a script in by Saturday, like, stuff like that. It really does cost you something.
And if you had a time machine, you do, right? What one piece of advice would you give yourself when you started your television journey?
Well, I feel like we've talked about it a bunch. I would talk less and listen more. And I just think that, that would be, I probably would have learned more, and I think learned a lot of mistakes quicker than I did. But that's about it. A lot of stuff, it's like you could tell, a lot of stuff you have to experience for yourself. So I could tell young me this advice, and he would probably been like, yeah, right. I don't believe you. Whatever. You're old. Yeah, you're old.
That's a pretty funny, like, time travel movie. You get to go back and give yourself advice, and young you is like, shut up. You don't know anything,
This is a funny thing about John. John does not like when people tell him what to do. And John will leave himself voice memos that are like, you got to pick up the so-and-so, or remember to do this. And when he hears his own voice sing it, he's like, fuck you, I do what I want. He doesn't even like it when he's reminding himself.
It's true. I've had to change it to be like, if you want to read this book, this could be a good book to read. Like, I have to do that to myself. Otherwise, I'm like, fuck you,
You've got
me.
the power, John.
Just an idea. It's just an idea, okay?
I know. That's obviously something wrong with me. But yeah, well, Nelson, thank you. This is really helpful. We'll come back next week with another Nelson episode.